Hello everybody, today we're going to be talking about armor breaking in Deep Rock Galactic, and kind of which weapons can benefit from having armor breaking and which weapons don't benefit as much from armor breaking. So armor breaking is kind of a weird mechanic in general in this game, and I don't fully understand how it works, but I'll give you kind of the brief overview of what armor breaking kind of is. I talked about this in the latest 100 tips video, but I wanted to expand upon it more in this video and just kind of talk about the specific weapons as to which ones benefit more from armor breaking than others. Armor breaking works in kind of two ways, at least the way I see it, it works in two ways. One is for stripping the armor off of bigger enemies like Praetorians or Wardens or even the Twins. Now it can also work in a second way, which is punching through the armor of light armored enemies. These would be regular grunts, or I think acid spitters and web spitters also have light armor on them. Anything that's not heavily armored to where you have to strip the armor off of them likely has light armor on it. And light armor gives that bug 20% damage reduction. So if you have armor breaking on your weapon and you're not hitting a weak spot, because weak spots don't have armor usually, Brundleflies are the exception to that, I believe, and I guess kind of rollers are too. Armor breaking then essentially gives you true damage to that enemy. So you don't have to worry about the armor, and you can kill them a little bit faster than you otherwise would, unless of course you're overkilling them. So I'm using Karl.gg right here just to kind of double check how much armor breaking each weapon gets, and whether the armor breaking for the weapon is really that important. First up we have Driller, and Driller does not have any armor breaking on any of their weapons, with one exception being the corrosive sludge pump. Other than that, you actually don't get the choice of taking any armor breaking with your weapons, which kind of makes sense. About the only weapon that it would maybe make sense for, well, I guess maybe two weapons would be like the EPC and the Sabata itself, but neither one of those necessarily need it, especially as a secondary tool, but that's besides the point. The corrosive sludge pump can eat away armor, and that's just baseline on it. It used to be a tier 5 perk to take, and it was a really good tier 5, but now they made it just base kit for the sludge pump, which is even better. And the sludge pump will eat away any armor on basically anything. It'll just melt through everything. This can even account for light armor as well. So if you shoot something like a regular grunt, maybe a grunt that's being buffed up by a warden, because otherwise the sludge pump will probably kill that grunt very fast, the sludge pump will actually eat away the armor, so it's basically like having armor breaking on any weapon that then hits it afterwards. The other weapons for Driller really wouldn't benefit, at least primary weapons wouldn't benefit from having any armor breaking on them, because the flamethrower, you're mostly dealing the damage from the fire, or you're just holding it down on something until it burns to death in the case of like Face Melter. And the cryo cannon, you don't need it at all because armor doesn't matter if something is frozen. If something's frozen, you're just going to deal massive damage to it regardless. So let's move on over to Engineer and talk about their weapons. The first weapon that has armor breaking is the Warthog Auto Shotgun. Now you could build armor breaking on the Warthog and break apart armor a little bit better. There's kind of an issue with even going with like more pellets with the Warthog, and that's even if you have armor breaking plus more pellets, you still don't have enough damage to one-shot grunts with the standard Warthog anyway. You'd have to two-shot them regardless, which I believe you could do even without armor breaking, so armor breaking becomes a little bit redundant for them. Now you could use it for bigger things like Praetorians or Wardens to strip their armor away. And that kind of can work, but still usually going with more damage is more important than that, because the main overclock that I would say would be really great for armor breaking would be something like mini shells, where you have a lot of shots with it. The problem with that though is if you go with damage and you go with pellets, you can still then one-shot headshot normal grunts. If you don't have this, then you can't do it anymore. Now that might not be a terrible thing for you, especially if you wanted to go with like full ammo, armor breaking, and turret whip, in which case this overclock could work with armor breaking, but generally the Warthog doesn't really benefit from having the armor breaking on it. So this is one weapon where armor breaking is not necessarily a bad thing. It's always going to be a bonus, but it's just that there is a better option for you to take. Stubby does not have armor breaking, does have electricity though, which is pretty nice, so we're not going to be talking about that. The Loki also has armor breaking on it too, at least on one of its overclocks being armor breaking module. Now this one gets you pretty much true armor breaking. It will strip the armor off of absolutely everything. This only works at full lock though, so you do have to fully lock onto things. This is just a bonus, so if you like taking it, then that's awesome. It's not one of my favorite overclocks. Things like explosive chemical rounds I think work better even against armor because it can just strip the armor off of them. And sometimes seeker rounds itself can just ignore armor, at least unbreakable armor, on things like oppressors and the dreadnoughts. There is armor breaking, however, on the secondaries for the engineer, more so than just the Warthog as its primary and one overclock for the Loki. We have armor breaking on the 40mm PGL grenade launcher. This has 500% more armor breaking. However, the armor breaking is sort of not working, at least the way that it probably should work on the grenade launcher currently. It only really works on the grenade itself, not on the explosion from the grenade. So having armor breaking on this doesn't really matter, because if you're direct impacting most bugs, you're probably going to do a decent amount of damage with that regardless, even regardless of overclock. And armor breaking here kind of feels like a dead skill a lot of the time, because it can get some value, but it will only attack where the grenade actually hits, and where the grenade hits is localized to the actual bug itself. So if you hit a Praetorian in the arm or something, it would just break the armor on the arm. It wouldn't break the armor on the rest of the Praetorian. Even with all of its overclocks, there's not really a great one to run it with. RJ250 might be the better one, just because you get the most shots with it. The problem with that, though, is that you have Incinerary Compound, and RJ250 can benefit from the Incinerary Compound in two ways. You can potentially live falling damage with it, because you're dealing less damage to yourself, which is nice. And it also gives it enough damage to clear up regular swarms of grunts, which is fairly nice. It's just a nice bonus to have on it. So armor breaking on the grenade launcher really isn't worth it. Even with something like hyper propellant, where you might think that taking the pressure wave would make the most sense, because why not just take more armor breaking on a high damage weapon like this? That doesn't really work, because all of your damage is converted to disintegration damage, and this also seems localized to the bug, so you don't even deal that much damage when you hit a bug in the armor. Now, you could say that, well, you don't really need extra velocity on this, which is true. There's no real reason to run extra velocity on hyperpropellant. It's already fast enough and accurate enough that you really don't need this. So Incinerary Compound is kind of the one way to go, which this one seems like a bad choice, because it nerfs your direct damage, which it would be if it worked that way. Since hyperpropellant does not count as a regular explosive, it counts as disintegration damage. The fire damage actually doesn't affect it whatsoever in terms of damage. It just gives you fire on top of hyperpropellant, making the one that would seem the worst, at least on paper, is actually the best for hyperpropellant the majority of the time. Kind of counterintuitive there, but that is how that works. The Breach Cutter also has armor breaking on it, and the Breach Cutter's armor breaking is pretty straightforward. It actually does just strip the armor off of enemies. It's working now. There was a time where this was bugged and absolutely did nothing to any of the bugs, so it's nice that that got fixed. This does strip the armor off of bugs, and armor breaking on the Breach Cutter is pretty legit. If you want to take it, it's great. I like taking the stun a little bit more, because a 3-second stun is pretty nice, especially when you have something like the Breach Cutter, which hits so hard you can fire multiple rounds through an enemy without worrying about it actually spitting on you or hitting you or whatever it might be. The Shard Diffractor also has armor breaking on it, and the Shard Diffractor's armor breaking is only on the direct laser of this. This is not to the AoE damage that the Shard Diffractor has, because again, AoE damage is kind of bugged with armor breaking. This can also be a pretty good choice, although it is still in the high intensity heating tier, where you can just light things on fire faster. That's generally going to be better against things like robots, but if you're just going on, say, an egg hunt or something, and you don't have rival presence, then the fire would also be a great option. This one is really your choice, similar to the Breach Cutter, and this is another good choice to take armor breaking on if you want to take it. Moving on to Gunner. Gunner has, I think, armor breaking on almost every weapon. So armor breaking on the minigun. Armor breaking on the minigun is actually pretty good. It's in the same tier as blow-through rounds, which blow-through rounds tends to outshine armor breaking, but if you want to do more damage to big enemies, like you want to strip the armor off Praetorians quickly, armor breaking can work very well on the minigun, and I do like taking it with Lead Storm or Exhaust Vectoring if I just want to get that extra damage towards big enemies, if I'm building it specifically towards big enemies. So armor breaking on the minigun, a good choice. The autocannon also has armor breaking in its tier 4. Now it is the same with its AoE radius, and AoE autocannon is quite good. I believe the autocannon works the same way as all the other AoE weapons, where the AoE does not actually do armor breaking, so only the direct damage. Now that usually is a turnoff for these type of weapons, but with the autocannon you're firing out so many rounds and you're likely hitting things directly that you can strip the armor off of big enemies quickly. The autocannon is inaccurate, but that doesn't matter when you're fighting something the size of a Praetorian. It's pretty easy to hit it at most ranges. So armor breaking becomes a pretty good choice on the Thunderhead autocannon as well, and I really like taking it with things like Big Bertha. You can take it with basically anything. Hurricane also has armor breaking, and this is in the max velocity tier, which you may or may not need. It depends on how you like the missiles actually flying. Now, armor breaking on this also only counts for the direct damage, not for the explosive damage, but that really doesn't matter for the Hurricane because you can guide the rockets into enemies. So the armor breaking is still a very legitimate choice to be taking on this, and it's great for stripping the armor off of Praetorians or guards. And it's very good if you want to take it with Jet Fuel Homebrew, because if you build damage and you have the armor breaking as well as something like the weak spot damage, this makes it so you can just one-shot headshot regular grunts with just a single rocket. Very nice. Or you can two-shot body shot them because you have enough damage punching through, since even though your area damage is cut down, doesn't really matter when this is doubled and ignoring the body. Now, again, that makes armor breaking really good for the Hurricane. So Gunner has 3 primary weapons that armor breaking is pretty legit on. For secondaries, we have at least one more, with the Burst Pistol getting armor breaking. I believe that's the only one. Yes. The Burst Pistol gets armor breaking in its tier 4. Now, is armor breaking worth taking on the Burst Pistol? Not really, I would say. It's not a terrible option if you just want to spray this at enemies, and it can be okay with certain overclocks. If you take it with like composite casings or compact mags or even something like micro flechettes, it's actually not too bad with. It's just you also have weak spot damage here, and you also got ammo, which are 2 really good choices too. So hardened rounds with the Burst Pistol, maybe not the best, especially because all of your primary weapons can have armor breaking, so if you want to strip the armor off of enemies, you do have other choices there. And the GK2 does have armor breaking, and armor breaking is pretty good on the GK2. Now, unfortunately, it's also in the same tier as hollow point rounds, where usually I will take this, but armor breaking is a good choice here, because GK2 doesn't do that much damage per shot, and if you can make all of that damage count on something like grunts, that's better. The M1000 Classic also has armor breaking, and this one is one of the best armor breaking perks in the game, or at least best armor breaking mods in the game. The reason for this is that the M1000 Classic hits at 55 damage. Now, if you use a focus shot, this doubles your damage. It also doubles the ammo that it takes. But now you completely ignore the armor of regular grunts, and you're hitting 110 damage, where on Hazard 4 and 5, grunts have 108 health, meaning that you will kill them. You can also combine this with something like blow-through rounds, and then have armor-breaking blow-through rounds, and punch through up to 3 guards, killing all 3 with just 1 shot. That is really good, and that's what makes this such a good option here. It's mostly that the M1000 is such a strong base weapon and gets something like armor breaking, which is just a bonus. The Drac also has armor breaking on it, which can be very useful. So you have 3 primary options with Scout, all with armor breaking on them, and armor breaking on the Drac is pretty good too. This one can strip away armor quickly. The Drac fires fast. It doesn't do that much damage per shot, but it is very useful here. Tier 4 with the Drac, honestly, all of these are really good. Electricity's good, Plasma Splash is good, and Armor Breaking is good. Armor Breaking can be really useful if you want to take it with like Overtuned Particle Accelerator to kill big things even faster. It can really work with any of the overclocks though, and can just work with the base Drac. And Scout also has one secondary that has Armor Breaking on it too, which is the double-barreled Boomstick, having the tungsten-coated buckshots. It's not really necessary with Boomstick to have Armor Breaking on it. It can be okay, but it's also in the same tier as blow-through rounds, which blow-through rounds is really good on the Boomstick and gets you a lot of value. I would say armor breaking is better than the improved blast wave, because you really don't need the improved blast wave on the Boomstick for really any build. Armor breaking on it, though, is pretty useful, especially if you want to go with more ammo. Go with something like compact shells, get some more ammo, and maybe stack ammo in tier 1 and 2, or 1 and 3, sorry. This one's somewhat similar to the Warthog, though, where it's not entirely necessary. It's not going to hinder the weapon, it's just going to be a bonus, but you don't really need it. You don't really need this on the regular Boomstick to kill regular things like grunts and stuff either, because the Boomstick does enough damage to do it by itself. So for a TLDR section, I quickly threw together this little chart here, showing kind of my opinions on armor breaking, whether it be nice to have. I also put the Corrosive Sludge Pump up here because it's kind of on it by default. Then okay to have, so good options if you want to take it. It's going to be beneficial to you, but it's not necessary. And then better options are available. Couple of weapons there where armor breaking is an option, but it's not really a great option to be having on the weapon. So as you can see, Scout and Gunner really come out ahead here. So hopefully this kind of helped you guys out and maybe brought up kind of a reason to take armor breaking, or maybe not a reason to take armor breaking with certain weapons. Thanks everybody for watching this. I really do appreciate it. If you guys have any other questions or thoughts on videos such as this, please leave them down in the comments below. I'd be interested in reading them. Special thanks to the supporters of this channel. These are my members over here on YouTube, patrons over on Patreon. They get early access to videos like this, and if you'd like to be a part of it, there are links in the description. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye!